And the recording's in progress. Great. Okay. And then we'll obviously end with a little Q&A, and if everything works, we can maybe unmute line. So, but if you do have questions, like Rachel said, please put those in the Q&A section. Okay. Moving to the cloud. Why? I don't even know. It's interesting. As I was building this slide, I wrote why and then a question mark. I'm not really sure that why is the question anymore. Right. I think that it's kind of expected. You know, it's just some stats, some math to sort of back up that proposal. Over 90% of organizations today are using at least one cloud service. By the end of 2024, Gartner projects that almost 15% of the entire IT budget will be based on cloud spending. And that might sound low, but when you think of all of the cost that goes into running laptops and desktops and server rooms and VoIP and you know, all of the systems that IT has to run, and then when you sort of calculate in the sort of economical nature of cloud software, 15 still feels really high to me. On average, organizations have about 5 cloud services. I think at KnowledgeLake we have 7. Everything from CRM to our customers' ticketing system. Our development pipeline is based on Azure DevOps cloud service. So we obviously fully embrace that cloud, and organizations are moving in that direction. Specifically around information management and content services. So first, before we move on, information management, content services. Some people used to refer to it as ECM, enterprise content management. This is that platform in your ecosystem that holds your organization's most important business critical content. Some people are very rudimentary and they use things like network attached storage locations and file shares. Some people are even more rudimentary and still operate in paper. I know it sounds crazy, but there's still many organizations that have paper stored in filing cabinets. I would be lying if I didn't tell you KnowledgeLake's had at least one of those. This is places where you store contracts and documents related to adjudicating a claim or opening a new customer account, right? This is that content. You've got information stored in ERP systems, line of business systems like SAP or Dynamics, like Salesforce or Workday. This is the content related to those transactions. And so almost every major vendor in that ecosystem has a cloud offering. Some more robust than others. Some will say cloud, and what they really mean is legacy software stored in a VM in the cloud, which is not the same thing. And so my first sort of piece of advice for anybody who's in the process of considering cloud and you're working with vendors and they say, yeah, we've got a cloud solution, I would implore you to ask them about their architecture. Because old software that used to be deployed on premise, put into a virtual machine inside of AWS or Azure, is not really cloud software. It lacks the scale, the orchestration, it lacks security and compliance in a lot of situations that real cloud first, cloud modern software has. So. All right, so again, if we have to answer this question why, we'll go ahead and answer it. Maybe there are some people who maybe they believe in the cloud in the audience today and they just need some extra bullets in their gun to sort of make their case of why cloud and why moving the content part of your business to the cloud is important. First of all, the cloud offers immense amount of power, but also agility. So when I say power, I mean capabilities, the ability to integrate systems. Agility. If you think about, I spoke with one CIO the other day about the cloud, and I asked him, what's sort of your favorite parts about being a cloud first company? And he said the agility. And what he meant was if we wanted to prototype a new idea or develop a solution and then go show it to the end users to maybe get their buy-in, they'd have to requisition and spin up hardware, create the solution, deploy it, maybe move it from dev, test, prod. And that takes time versus cloud software. You can very easily spin up experiments and get buy-in and you can do that in a much faster rate than with on-prem software. Scalability, we talked a little bit about before, but the ability to not have to worry about attaching more hard drives. Are we running out of space? What do the hard drives look like on the SQL server? With cloud software, almost all of that is taken care of for you. Automatic scale of both processing power as well as storage. It oftentimes has a much lower total cost of ownership. And I don't just say that it costs less, because cloud software doesn't always necessarily cost less. But when you talk about not having physical servers, hardware, managing a data center, a lot of time what often gets looked over is the licensing costs. Some database licenses costs are $40,000, $50,000 a year. And so being able to deprecate those machines and get rid of those licensing costs, the time spent on backups and recoveries and upgrades and things like that. It's a complex topic, but ultimately you almost always end up with a lower total cost of ownership with cloud. Integration, many cloud applications are built as platforms. And so integration is sort of the name of the game there, being able to build end-to-end solutions that touch multiple areas of business, multiple solutions, and really build that experience for your end users and ultimately your customers that you're looking for. And then finally, security. And I think this is a really interesting one, because if I asked you, let's say 6 years ago, it's not that long ago, do you feel like your own data center or the cloud software is more secure? I think most everybody would have answered, well, my on-prem solution is more secure. And I think somewhere along the last 6 years that switched. And I think the implication is, Microsoft spends $1 billion a year on Azure for just security. And I don't know many organizations that have the capability of spending $1 billion on security. So they're making investments proactively. They have a lot of investment in Azure. And if they lose the trust of their customers by not being secure, well, that is a real problem. And so they're heavily investing. And so I think that leads to sort of that nature of security being a strong benefit of the cloud, not a liability, as maybe some people looked at before. Okay, so I have you all convinced we definitely are going to move to the cloud. We understand the area of our business that we refer to as content management or content services, and it's got to be in the cloud. So it's just a matter of when, not if.
All right, so I'll take it over from here, Jason. That's good.
Yeah.
So I think Jason, made the great point. It's happening. If you haven't already started, it's coming soon, right? And so I wanted to just talk about a few points here that are important when it comes to selecting a cloud vendor, selecting a cloud solution. What are the things that should be top of mind for you when you're making those decisions? The first, Jason already kind of hit on it, is security, right? When you go from on-prem to cloud, you are ceding some amount of control. And so it's important during the buying process, during procurement, that you're asking those critical questions to make sure you understand your vendor's posture, make sure you understand that they're taking all the necessary steps to safeguard your data, and selecting vendors that put security at the front of their focus all the way from the beginning of the software development lifecycle all the way through operations and beyond. So that's really, really important. The second really important factor, and when you're thinking about the move, is the pace of play with technology is continuing to accelerate, right? Every year things move faster. And so it's important when you're making selections of new vendors, especially in the cloud, that you're selecting technology stacks that are built for the future, that are future-proofing the investment you're making. So as new emerging disruptive technologies come out, the solutions you're investing in can be evolved and adapted to take advantage of those new competitive features to give your business the best chance to succeed. When you think about this transition of any workload into the cloud, your users are at the center of that experience, and making sure you're selecting a solution and a vendor that provides the capabilities that your users are using every single day. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't reevaluate these processes and look to optimize and modernize where possible. But those core capabilities your users are using, they're going to revolt if you have to take a step back and they don't have the buttons or the capabilities they're used to using in the software. And that dovetails nicely into that minimizing the impact. Obviously, we want the users to be happy and the impact to be minimal for them. But when you're making these transitions, this digital transformation, it's not always in one fell swoop can you get all this done, right? A lot of times you got to do a one yard at a time as you're running down the football field. And so selecting vendors and solutions that can work in a hybrid capacity, allowing you to leave some of the systems on-prem while you're taking some of them to the cloud, is really, really important to make that a successful rollout that's minimally impactful to your business and your users. And finally, we talked about security. The best cloud organizations are the ones that are willing to stand up to independent scrutiny and third-party assessment, right? And so saying we support compliance, and that organizations that are willing to publish their compliance and make those readily available to their customers should give you an extra layer of security and trust that the vendor is safeguarding your data and taking care of it, and thinking about that at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, just one more thing there on I think you made an excellent point about minimizing impact. And a big part of that is that change management. And I've often found that change management is significantly easier if you get the actual end users involved in the process earlier. If they feel like they have a voice and they can see their thumbprint on the new implementation, if they feel like they're a part of it, they're less likely to revolt, as Brad said, versus something being done to them, right? They're a part of the journey in the process. And then when it's live and it's new and it's exciting, they can take pride in having really helped their organization. So involving users early is super critical.
Yeah, great point, Jason. So what's the best way if it's going to happen and you're going to do it? What's the best way? So where do I start on this? How do you know where to begin if you're trying to make this cloud journey? Do I go left or do I go right? Do I do public cloud, private cloud? Do I look at my existing vendor, as Jason said, and see if they have a cloud offering and go with that? Or do I shop and look for new vendors? So there's obviously a lot of questions about figuring out where to start. And usually it leads to one kind of safe conclusion, which is start with what you know. Go from an area of knowledge and expand out and discover what's out there. And so for a lot of us on this call today, I think a lot of us are comfortable and knowledgeable about Microsoft SharePoint. And we all know that Microsoft has been making investments in Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Online. And so let's dive into this a little bit and talk about what it's good for and how you can leverage it in the cloud. So first, we know that SharePoint is great for collaborative content management, right? Co-authoring of PowerPoints and working on contracts and document creation, sharing to documents within and outside of your organization. As well as obviously robust integration with the Office applications, right? It is a world-class tool for collaborative content management. But what we found in our years of experience is that it's a bit lacking. It comes up a bit short when you're thinking about those transactional processes for content services. We're talking about the high velocity, high volume, high value workloads, the lifeblood of your business, the things that the bills got to get paid, the orders got to get sent. It's accounts payable, it's claims processing, it's employee and customer onboarding, workloads like that need high scalability and high speed. It's not always the perfect fit, and so there can be issues there. Also, when you think about some of the more advanced capabilities like advanced capture, which means document classification, information and fact extraction, as well as separation. Additional AI with analytics and getting knowledge out of your content. While Microsoft has released Syntex and Viva recently for SharePoint Online, it's not a turnkey solution like setting up a content type, right? There's a lot that has to go into that, and so while it is a good start, it really isn't a complete solution to solve those more complex use cases. So, if SharePoint can't do all of it that we need it to do for those transactional workloads, what are we going to do? Well, we need a new, more powerful set of tools to answer the bell. So that we believe is Microsoft Azure. So I want to stop here, and I think we're going to do a quick poll to find out where everybody is in their journey to the cloud, and specifically with Azure.
And so everybody should have gotten a poll pop up here, and so if you could go ahead and start taking a vote, we'll give everybody a second to let some of the votes come in, and then we'll share a little bit of the results here. Yeah, great. I'm pretty even distribution here sort of across the board, you know, about a third of the people who responded saying we're all in, using it across the organization. A little less than half saying we just got started. And I would say this holds pretty true to most organizations that I talk to. It's pretty much this distribution. And I think hopefully what you'll hear sort of as we move through the rest of this is, you know, as you're getting started or as you're using it across your organization, you'll have a new idea of how you can serve your organization in the future with Azure and the platform. And maybe, you know, for those of you that haven't started yet, this will be just the sort of first project or first idea to sort of, you know, jump in the water with.
Perfect. Well, let's keep rolling then. So as Jason said, let's talk about Azure. So what is it, right? I think we all have our own perspective on what it is, but I think we can all agree at a high level that kind of the common theme what everybody knows, right? Which is it's cloud service. It's used for file storage and compute, right? You're moving your compute workloads to Azure. I think we all know that it's unlimited, has, you know, unlimited high scalability. But then there's also these other kind of a lot of other services, and it helps connect, you know, the data between, you know, the compute and the storage. But that's a very, very high level 40,000 foot view. And I want to take a minute and dial up the microscope a bit and look at some of the more robust capabilities that you really can get out of Azure. So if you zoom in a couple clicks, you can see that it actually has quite a bit more. If you start at the compute tier, of course, it has virtual machines, you know, same thing you've been running on-prem, but in the cloud, you know, that's really infrastructure as a service. But there's, you know, on those cloud services and dynamic compute, you've got Azure Functions, you've got App Service, you have lots and lots of options from a compute perspective to deliver your business critical applications. From a data perspective, you know, we obviously all know SQL Server. They have SQL Azure. They've got, you know, Azure Cosmos DB, which is their multi-model database, which supports multiple different database APIs, table storage, file storage, network tier. It's got an amazing set of tools for developers, identity management with Azure Active Directory. It's, you know, I could go on, and I could spend an hour talking about this slide. But the point is, Azure is a toolbox. It's a toolbox full of tools that enable organizations to build solutions to solve their complex and critical business problems with this toolbox within Microsoft Azure. It is, you know, it's constantly evolving and constantly getting new capabilities. But I want to go to the next slide, and I want to talk about a few of the core benefits of Azure, what I see as Azure being really the market leader in these areas. We already talked about scale, but I'll just drive this home one more time. All those services that I showed you on the previous slide, almost all of them have some sort of auto scaling feature on those services, meaning you can flip a switch, toggle a button and say, hey, I want to turn on scaling for this. And so when you think about what you used to have to do on-prem, which was, okay, I'm building this infrastructure for this workload, and on December 31st, the last day of the year is our busiest day, and it requires 2 times the amount of throughput that the system normally needs. Well, you had to scale up that hardware. It had to be always up to handle that high watermark. In the cloud with Azure, you simply flip that switch and say, hey, I want to enable auto scaling. And then as your workload ebbs and flows based on your business, it's going to scale up and it's going to scale down, and it's going to be perfectly right sized so that your users are always getting a responsive and a fast user experience, but you're not having to do all the extra work to over provision something with unneeded complexity when you don't need it. So it can really scale to the moon, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. You know, Jason mentioned security, and he's spot on, right? Microsoft spends $1 billion a year on security. They take it very seriously, and they are the market leader in the cloud when it comes to security. So they have, and that dovetails nicely into compliance. They have basically every certification under the sun. So if you're in a highly regulated industry, or you just want to make sure that you can audit and verify that they're doing the things they need to do, they make all that readily available to their customers, and they invest millions or billions into security and compliance. You know, when you think about cloud, the early days, it kind of felt like the Wild West, right? There was a lot of uncertainty as to, is this thing going to work? Are these proven technologies? And I can tell you now that the world's largest organizations are running their mission critical workloads on Azure. For example, I just read a blog post a while ago about Walmart and how they're running their entire e-commerce of Walmart.com on Azure and on Cosmos DB, right? It's processing millions of transactions every hour, and it's set up to scale to the moon, and they're doing that all on Azure. So you know that if Walmart can do it, obviously, you know, that they're one of the largest organizations in the world. So it's ready for prime time. It is proven technology. And the second piece I'll add there is Microsoft has done a great job evolving their pipeline for releasing new features. So when they build new features or new microservices, they put them into preview, they make them available under preview, and they're in preview for many, many months, getting used by those bleeding edge enthusiasts. And then once they GA that feature, it's ready to go and ready to be used for production workloads on day one. The power of Azure is really the ability for you to compose something unique out of those discrete microservices or tools in your toolbox. That list I showed you was that wasn't even all of them, but you can take those tools, those Lego blocks, and build them up to be whatever your heart's content and whatever your organization needs to be successful. And that, in my mind, that's really where the power is the interoperability and flexibility of those microservices. And finally, I want to talk about affordability for a minute. I think that cloud sometimes gets a bad rap about being expensive. I've had a lot of experience here at KnowledgeLake in optimizing and streamlining our cloud spend with Azure. And I can tell you that partly due to the auto scaling capability where you scale up for what you need and you scale down when you don't, it can really actually be very economical. If you don't manage it, it can obviously get away from you, but you can store terabytes and terabytes of data in Azure and have a bill that, doesn't even have a comma in it for how small the bill will be. So really my guidance on Azure and affordability is it is quite affordable if you do it right. If you have good governance and good control and oversight on your spend. And in reality, when you need it to scale, it'll be there. And when you don't need it to be scaled up, it'll be inexpensive. And so I actually have a blog post coming out here in the next week or two on knowledgelake.com that talks about some ways where you can optimize your Azure spend. So I'd be on the lookout for that. So Azure has a lot of great benefits, and it's a great platform for innovation. But the one thing it's not is it's not a content management or content services tool, right? It's not a platform just for delivering content services. It is a toolbox for building solutions. And so I'm going to hand it back over to you, Jason, to talk about some of the gaps and how you might fill those.
Yeah, I think like you said, Azure is a platform, and as a platform, it does have a lot of tools. And in the same way we talked about Syntex, Microsoft Syntex and Viva, it's a great set of tools, but it's not a pre-built application that sort of has some of the things you need. And so, for instance, you can store documents in Azure. They have Azure Blob Storage, and you can store the files up in there like a cloud file share. But then you need a way to access them, an end user way to access them, to be able to search and find the document that you're looking for. It is a storage location. It does not have pre-built user roles and access controls and permissions built. If you want to keep multiple versions, they have the ability to do versioning. The storage locations and a lot of these resources have the ability to do versioning, but then you don't have the capabilities of looking at previous versions or rolling back. You can build audit trails and reporting, but those things don't come out of the box. But I guess most of all, one of the sort of core defining characteristics of a really quality content management system is a way to organize your data. And in the biz, we call that taxonomy. It is a way to identify a document, to classify it. This is a contract, this is an invoice. For contracts, I think that things like contract date and vendor are important. For invoices, I think invoice amount and invoice number are important. And so that gives you a way to sort of, if you think about the old way of storing things in paper, it's the filing cabinet you would have put it in, the drawer in that cabinet, and the folder within that drawer, right? That sort of taxonomy is a system to represent that. But out of the box, Azure as a platform doesn't have that. And so if we we talked a little bit about SharePoint, a little bit about Azure. Let's talk about the things that you need and sort of what boxes get checked where. SharePoint, certainly user-friendly. Azure, much more a platform for developers. I won't read through all of these here, but pick out a couple of my favorites. SharePoint does have some really good taxonomy and metadata that can be configured. When we talk about data ownership, I think this is a unique, a new topic that we're talking about in the world of cloud, which is who owns my data and where is it stored. If you think about even some great, amazing cloud software companies, Salesforce, Workday, Microsoft 365, including SharePoint, they own your data. They keep it in their data centers somewhere in the universe, and you don't have access to it. Through their UI, you do. Through their APIs, you might have to pay extra for that. And so, I thought Brad made an interesting point earlier about future-proofing my investment, right? Like, I don't want to have to migrate out of another system later. I just want to own my data. And so Azure allows you to do that. So both of these things by themselves, not perfect. Okay, so now what do I need next? So where we go from here? Again, we have many of the right pieces in place. Over half of you say that you're already using Azure, either enterprise-wide or somewhat. From our poll earlier, I think almost everybody in the world has Microsoft 365, at least some type of SharePoint or SharePoint on-prem licenses. So now what? We still have a little bit of work to do. And so if we look at just Azure, so let's look at what a modern cloud content services platform might look like. We get to own our own data. We get unlimited scale. It's safe and secure. It's easy to configure. As Brad said, it's economical. So those are some of the things we want. So what are the things we have to create to get there? Well, I have to be able to give my users a way to search and view and find that content once it's stored in Azure. I need to be able to capture, identify, classify, and tag content that I put in there. I need to make sure it's secure with permissions. And then I need to be able to drive, being able to capture documents and store them is the first half, the first mile of that problem. The second mile, that sometimes is even more valuable, is the workflows and integrations and automations I can drive downstream. And so what we really need is a suite of services that wrap around the Azure platform that add those capabilities, like versioning and audit trail, like searching and viewing, like taxonomy. And then we need to include SharePoint, which is great in a lot of situations, for those collaborative workflows, for those documents that need to be authored, right? I'm creating them inside of my organization. And I want to, Brad, just like Brad and I with this PowerPoint today, that's a collaborative piece of content. It's still content, but it's collaborative content. We worked on this PowerPoint. We put it inside of Teams. We worked on it at the same time as we were reviewing slides this morning. I could see what slide Brad was on. He could see where I was on. We were making changes in real time. SharePoint and Microsoft Teams are absolutely perfect for that. Absolutely perfect. And so having that as a part of your overall ecosystem and being able to pick, hey, look, these loan documents that we get $10,000 a month for, that is how our organization makes money, and it's paper or PDFs that come in from outside of our organization. That's different than co-authoring over PowerPoint. You shouldn't have to pick a single tool to support all of that content. And so taking an approach like this, you really get the best of both worlds with content management on top of Microsoft. You really do get to check all of the boxes with a safe and secure platform that's future-proofed as your organization moves through its digital transformation. Okay, that was a lot of words. In summary, we'll wrap up. Leveraging Microsoft tools that many of our organizations already have and moving to the cloud makes good sense. There's a lot of advantages that can be gotten there. Certainly things like change management and security, compliance, picking the right tools are a part of that conversation. And you need to be careful as you move forward and think about a lot of things that Brad said earlier. But to leverage those tools that Microsoft gives us it's not just a totally out of the box, turn it on, flip the key, and we're running thing. You need to add a full content services platform. Luckily, KnowledgeLake has been creating a cloud-first, cloud-native content services platform that brings together the best of SharePoint and Azure, that adds these capabilities that are missing out of the box for you. And so with that, we will wrap up and see. We have one last poll question, and then we'll take any other questions that you may have. If you don't feel, Rachel, do you want to click on that last poll? We'll get that published. And then if you don't feel comfortable talking, you can use the question and answer section, and we'll pay attention to that. If you do want to just raise your hand, I think maybe we have the ability to unmute the lines if you want to just go ahead and ask your question directly. What if SharePoint isn't my only repository? It's a great question. And actually, an organization called AIM, which is sort of the industry organization that is in charge of intelligent information management, says that on average, people have 7 different repositories for content in their organization. And we used to call it enterprise content management, and even Gartner has changed some of their verbiage to move towards content services, knowing that these systems very rarely got deployed enterprise-wide, right? They were often, back office, HR and accounting have this system, and claims and legal have this system, and et cetera, et cetera. So what if SharePoint is my only repository? There's a number of different strategies there. One that I talk with customers a lot, obviously, is migration, is consolidation of, look, you've got all of this basically free storage in Azure and in SharePoint that you can utilize. A lot of those old repositories that you have content in are probably very, very expensive, cumbersome, I'll say old. Maybe they haven't been updated with new features in a really long time. It's very common. And so you can actually migrate out of those platforms into new repositories like Azure and SharePoint Online that are more future-proof. There are great partners and great solutions out there that make it really easy, that already have connectors for a lot of these repositories that make that really simple. And I get that it's can be scary, but I promise there is a methodology in place to get that done. Another strategy is in place, leaving that content where it is and letting it sort of live the rest of its life cycle, putting all the new content into a new modern future repository and leaving the other stuff where that is, and sort of just letting those documents in their life cycle just sort of reach their end, and just naturally, eventually there'll come some day where you take a final backup to tape and put that thing in a closet and it's gone. And then the third is leaving that content in place, but building solutions that give your users modern tools to access that content, but you don't actually have to move it. Think of it like building a new kitchen. I don't have to remove everything from my kitchen. I don't have to rip out the plumbing and the electrical to just kind of give the cabinets a little facelift, right? And so you can kind of leave the guts where they are, but give some new tools on the front end to sort of increase that experience. So Mo asked, can I find documents on actual metadata? And so Mo, if you don't mind, I'll maybe ask you for a little more detail there. While you do that, I'll try and answer the best I can. Yes, with Azure and SharePoint, both systems have the ability to assign metadata or properties, classifications to documents. And there are tools like the one that KnowledgeLake has created, as well as things like Azure Search, and Microsoft already makes a great search platform called Graph to find documents based off of metadata. I will suggest, and I don't, the experience of finding documents in Teams or in SharePoint Online is, it's not ideal. It's very Google-like search. And so one of the challenges there is when you type in 1234, you might get a document that has an address of 1234 Main Street, an invoice number of 1234, part of a social security code, credit card number, right? It's not targeted. And so when you want to leverage metadata, the important part is targeted metadata searching. I want to find documents where invoice number equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and yes, that is available. KnowledgeLake provides tools like that and is absolutely possible.
So it looks like, Jason, there was a follow-up on that first question. I'll go ahead and take it. And interoperability between repositories and Microsoft tools is what I'm looking for. So, as Jason mentioned, Microsoft recently released, their Graph API. It's pretty new. And with that, where Microsoft is going is they're looking for those legacy vendors to write add-ins that can support searching and surfacing content from those older systems from within the Graph search API. So Microsoft has the API hook there to do it. It'll just be a matter of whether or not the repository that you have either has or will have a Graph connector so that those documents can be surfaced from the SharePoint search API.
Yeah,
and then there's good.
Sorry, just to build on that, Microsoft publishes with Graph, Azure, SQL, Microsoft SQL Server, File Share, Oracle, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and then obviously SharePoint as out-of-the-box Microsoft connectors. But there's a whole gallery of connectors that are published by other software companies like KnowledgeLake. So if you were using something like Alfresco, which is another content management solution, there's a company that makes an Alfresco connector for Microsoft Graph.
And it looks like there's one more question here: Azure versus AWS pros and cons. This is a great question. I would say that, if you would have asked that question 5 years ago, AWS was way out in front, right? They had a big lead both on robustness and capabilities, and Microsoft really has been pushing very hard to close that gap. Where we stand today from a capabilities perspective, they have almost parity between the two platforms, and there's very, very little difference in the actual capabilities of the platform. But there are a couple of really important distinctions for Azure that I think give them a leg up. The first is, if you're coming from the Microsoft ecosystem and you need to run workloads that leverage SQL Server or Windows Server, leveraging the existing licenses that your organizations already own and using the Azure hybrid licensing benefit makes those workloads about 5 times less expensive to run in Azure versus in AWS. The second is, again, security and compliance. The Microsoft is the leader when it comes to compliance and security. And so if you're running any sort of workload that is regulated or needs compliance, Microsoft is the clear winner there. And then finally, the interoperability integration between if you're already a Microsoft shop using Azure, using AD, Active Directory, or Azure AD, or you're using SharePoint Online, the tools within Azure connect really, really well to Microsoft 365, and you'll just have a little bit tighter connectivity there when you go with Azure. So, but from a capabilities perspective, they're really neck and neck. There's really almost no difference. But it's really those 3 key things that I think give Azure the leg up.
Yeah, Brad, I was going to say the identity management portion of it. Almost every organization in the world runs, not all, almost every organization in the world runs Active Directory for identity management, and having that be so tightly integrated into Azure, I think, is a real advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, again, thanks everybody for joining. We really enjoyed the time, and hopefully you took away some interesting information, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.